Hello, everyone. This is Miss Slater. It's my pleasure to welcome you to what I think is going to be a really interesting conversation today. Our guests are Dr. Min Yu and Miss Emily Garrity from the Ursuline class of 2009. Before we get started, I want to do a special kind of shout out to Mrs. Kemp. It was her forwarding an email that included Miss Garrity's video piece from the Today Show that got this conversation started. And she has also got us all organized today too. So a special thank you to her. This conversation got started and it jumped out at me as a really important story because of three things. One is it's a global story, and we talk a lot about our global mission at Ursuline Academy. It highlights the achievement of one of our alumna who is using her gifts to serve a bigger story. And it includes a theme of Serbian. You see a variety of people acting to serve others in a variety of ways. So these are all things that we talk a lot about at Ursuline. And there's nothing better than to see a real life story of people doing it rather than just talking about it. So having said that, I'm going to turn this conversation over to our students who are going to lead the rest of the day.
Okay. So Miss Garrity and Miss Yu, we know that this work that you've done is just wonderful. Could you tell us just a little bit about how you met and how you both came up with this project together?
So I guess I'll go ahead and start because I reached out to Min. So I'm a journalist. I live in New York City, and I always try to keep up with what people are doing in St. Louis. In New York, you know, there are a lot of journalists. Everybody's trying to sort of find stories and, you know, interesting things that people are doing. I personally cover human interest stories, people just doing really amazing things. And I, of course, being from St. Louis, know that it's a big city, metropolitan city with a lot of stuff going on. And there aren't many national journalists who are watching St. Louis as a place to find stories. And also most stories tend to come from the coasts, the East Coast or the West Coast. So I've always tried to keep an ear to the ground in St. Louis. This is the second story that I've done for Today Digital, the website for the Today Show. This is the second story I've done out of St. Louis for them. The first one was about a choir of stroke survivors who had lost their speech, but were in a program with Fonfon to learn how to speak again. So I joined a Facebook group when things with COVID started happening that were St. Louis COVID-19 support and outreach. And I just posted in this Facebook group and I said, do you know of anybody who's doing something really amazing in St. Louis and inspiring? And I got a lot of people responding to me, but somebody sent me the article in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch about what the Chinese Education and Culture Center was doing. And I thought, this is exactly sort of what I was looking for. And so I reached out to Min.
That's so cool.
So the only thing I would add is I really appreciated Emily teaching me along the way how her work actually, how her job actually gets done. She had to coach me a lot along the way. But she, from a professional point of view, she helped me understand how to tell a story through video and kind of little moments in life. I think it's really interesting. So I appreciated learning about your work.
I'm glad you felt that way because I definitely felt like, because, you know, I think another thing about COVID-19 with everybody working from home, it's challenging and it's also a new opportunity, especially for journalists, you know, who only really get to tell stories in maybe, you know, most likely one location. And so really I thought of this as an opportunity to look for stories really from anywhere. But of course, my first gut instinct was to look in St. Louis, but because I couldn't be there with my camera to capture what was happening, Min did a lot more footwork than subjects usually do. So
That is really cool,
I
though.
really appreciated how much stuff she sent me. Have I been pronouncing your last name wrong, Min? I was saying Lou. Is it you?
It is Liu.
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Apologies for that.
Thank you.
So I know that you have made your great work into a video. So I think we can watch a piece of it during this presentation.
Can you say that again?
I think we can watch a piece of the video, but that's it.
Our community wanted to do something to help patients and health workers in Wuhan. We have our home here, but China will always have that significance to us as our other home. So we decided to start a fundraising campaign co-hosted by the St. Louis Chinese Education and Culture Center and the Chinese Service Center of St. Louis. We actually donated 27 hospital-grade ventilators to Wuhan and nearby area hospitals.
We tried to go through the Nanjing government to help us to finding the ventilators in China.
One hospital that we donated to specialized in the care of expectant mothers and newborns. They wanted us to know that please remember how thankful we are because each unit is potentially saving not just one life, 2 lives. Our campaign was wrapping up at the end of February, at the beginning of March. We were kind of resting, and then at that time, we soon realized that the cases were probably going to hit the US very soon. The first sign that we kind of got was when we were celebrating the success of that campaign and we sent an invitation. So many of our donors RSVP'd yes, but then canceled last minute. This was way before any mainstream media were starting to talk about social distancing, but I think the Chinese American community, they knew what was probably about to happen. Our community members were asking us, can we donate masks? Can we donate some money? What are we doing to make sure that our hospitals will have the PPE they need? They knew that we were successful with the previous campaign, so they were wondering if we could do the same thing for the area here.
This video did a good job to show the work that you've done. And I encourage all the students to watch the full clip of it, and you can learn a lot from it. And after I watched the video, I'm so impressed with how much Chinese and St. Louis communities help each other. And I know between them, the Chinese Education and Cultural Center takes an important role. But even though I'm a Chinese here, I don't know much about this center. Can you give us more information about what this center is doing?
So the center is actually in Richmond Heights, right between Clayton and Big Bend. And I just wanted to officially invite any students in your school, if you ever need to do a field trip to a cultural center, please stop by. It's a 2-story building that used to be the headquarters of Panera Bread. So now the center usually on weekends. This is when our students in the community go and take Chinese language classes, music, Tai Chi, ping pong, kung fu, anything you can think of. It kind of became not just a heritage language school, but also a cultural center in the sense that we hold events there. We let the community organizations, including our high school youth organization, use the space if they need to do it, use it for an event. So the reason that people don't really hear about it is because, you know, the center had been doing kind of its thing. The thing is primarily serving the community, the mostly immigrant community. But I think, as I was telling Emily, I felt that this COVID-19 crisis kind of pushed a lot of these immigrant organizations into revisiting the role that we could play. You know, instead of simply just doing one thing, which we're really good at, what else could we do? This crisis kind of pushed or maybe helped us understand that we could do more things. You know, we could do advocacy, we could do fundraising, we could play a role by using our connections back in China. So
I think that must be a good place for me, because I am learning Tai Chi for I think for 5 years, and yes, I'm a great fan of that, and I think I will go that one day.
yeah, please.
So, as you may know, in today's society, everything is so instantaneous and always at a fingertip with social media and everything like that. And there is so much miscommunication. What are some challenges and opportunities that you see in promoting cultural understanding and an appreciation of cultural differences?
I think, Emily, throughout the whole process, you and I, or at least I, try to share some of my observations with you. Well, I'm curious to hear what your answers are. I mean, what did you notice, or what did this question make you think of?
Of course, as a journalist, now I'm very interested to hear what Min has to say. But I think as a journalist, of course, you're always thinking about misinformation and making web video, how quickly misinformation spreads. I think, and I was texting this, I have so many thoughts. It's hard to organize them. I mean, of course, I always try to be accurate. I always try to make sure that I know that everything I'm reporting is true. I was texting with Min about this the other day. I think people often confuse a country with, you know, the people in that country. You know, so if you hear things about, you know, China is doing this, or even if you're in China and you're hearing things, the United States is doing this, you can't really, and I think that this relates back to Ursuline and Serbian, is you can't, if you assumed that everybody in the United States was a bad person based on what the government does, I think we would all agree that that's totally wrong. So I think in terms of, I don't know if it's so much about misinformation, but I think in terms of the work that I've done, both with this story about the Chinese Education and Culture Center, doing stories on, I did a video about 2 sisters who are Muslim, and they are jujitsu fighters, and they do jujitsu fighting martial arts in their hijabs. Or I've done a lot of work about the LGBT community. I think no matter what, it's about telling someone's personal story, to have more empathy for a person and their experiences, and maybe other people who have those experiences, and sort of see a little bit more details about, you know, what it's like to be that person and celebrating people's differences. I don't know if that answers the question. I think I was like a little distracted, but
Yes,
I think,
yeah.
you know, in terms of being bombarded by misinformation, I think if you want to talk about misinformation happening now with COVID-19 and China's role in it, regardless of the information that's coming out in the news about the Chinese government or the United States government, in the end, you know, we are all going through this, and it's hard for all of us. And so I think solidarity can only be a positive thing. Does that answer the question?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
So,
that was a along.
No, but I like what you said. That's exactly how I feel as well. The challenges, of course, for us as a mostly immigrant community is that, you know, like in the video, I loved how Emily included that one quote from my colleague, Mr. Yi Mingzhu, and he made the comment about we're helping, or we're protecting our home again. What he meant, I think, is that he was saying that, you know, we protected our other home, and now we're moving things back to St. Louis, and we're protecting our home again. And that's really how a lot of immigrants, especially first generation immigrants, feel, is that they want to belong in both worlds. And that sometimes could be a challenge, especially in times of political tension. You know, there's no way to deny that there is definitely some higher levels of political tension at this point. So what are the opportunities? I think this is, opportunities are definitely there. One thing that I'm trying to do is using the May month of Asian Pacific American Heritage celebration to really maybe get the word out there about what, not just the Chinese American community, but the Vietnamese and the other Asian business community are doing, so that the rest of the St. Louis community know that, oh, there is these Asian American communities, and not that they exist, they're doing things, they're running businesses, they're different, you know, not just because we maybe look similar, maybe, you know, a Korean and the Japanese and Chinese are very different. So to recognize the diversity of our community, but also to recognize our contribution, or at least the efforts that we're making, that's an opportunity for me. Now, I was telling Emily, I said, usually I think the Asian communities tend to really shy away from media attention. And, you know, we don't want to really put a spotlight on ourselves. At least that's how I observe. But I think now is the time to maybe at least temporarily step into a more comfortable role when working with media, you know, tell a good story. Because those stories, once heard, can promote a lot of understanding. I really think so. So I've never really properly thanked Emily, but I think that video really made a huge difference. Whenever my job is to talk to, let's say, continuum of care, we donated to about 40 different nursing homes, and I cannot tell you how many times when I tell them, oh, and then a couple of times they'll say, oh, I remember reading about your work through the Today video. And, you know, it wasn't because we sent it out, it was because they saw it somewhere. So I think, you know, one opportunity is to really be more okay with telling a story instead of just hiding it, you know?
Yes, and it definitely has made an impact on our community because we got this experience to talk to you guys about it. So it's very inspiring and cool.
Yes, and
I'm glad.
I showed that video to my parents in China, and they told me that in China they can never watch see some news about this kind of thing. They are all see the news that the government sent out, and those news are not really pleasing. But after they see this video, they said to me that that's how the community should work, and they are glad that I'm in St. Louis.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and you know, our Ursuline motto of Serbian, I will serve, it clearly lives in the work you are both doing in our world. As a high school student, we are trying our best to serve our local communities, but serving the global society may seem like too vague and broad. Can you give advice to our high school students about the importance of living Serbian in our global society?
I guess I'll start since, of course, I went to Ursuline, and so I'm very familiar with Serbian and sort of how, you know, it works at Ursuline in St. Louis. I would say that I didn't necessarily, how do I word this? When I was going to school at Ursuline, we had just gotten the like, it was like brand new in 2008 broadcast lab. And I had not taken broadcast until they got this system, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I like already was into video production. I already was, you know, editing videos and doing every project I could as every, you know, time I could turn in a video instead of an essay, I was doing that. And so I don't think I guess there were a couple things I didn't think about that I look back now and I can think about, you know, my experience at Ursuline and, you know, Servium. One, I didn't think I would necessarily be a nonfiction filmmaker or a journalist. I think it was only like in practice that I realized how good it felt and how many people had stories to tell that are just, you know, waiting or haven't even thought about, you know, how it, you know, could be a universal, you know, story of service and empathy and care. And so it was only like when I moved to New York and I started working that, and I felt so called to do nonfiction films of this sort of like uplifting social justice nature, that I sort of looked back and I was like, oh, you know, that really makes sense with the way that I grew up and, you know, doing a lot of service work. I think that it became, you know, I think when I was growing up, I didn't really think like, oh, like, you know, Catholic nuns are so, I didn't think like, you know, oh, like, you know, I don't think anybody would think like the epitome of like cool is like, you know, but I look back from like a social justice perspective, knowing what I know and seeing, you know, how much service work and social justice causes have meant specifically to, you know, women in Catholic religious orders. And so that, you know, sticks out to me as like not realizing that I had, you know, a lot of empowered women in a different way than I had, you know, thought about empowered women. I look back and I can say, okay, I see what they did there. I think I don't know if this is about Servium, but about diversity. And I think the impact of diversity is that empathy of being able to look at someone and say, okay, your experience is different than mine. You know, I'm not a Chinese person who is facing, you know, potentially being discriminated against because of what's happening with COVID-19. But I do know what it's like to feel like, you know, the world is against you, to feel like society is saying you can't be, it's not okay to be who you are, and trying to sort of meet that with positivity and enthusiasm. And so I think in terms of diversity, I didn't realize in doing like junior service project, where my junior service project, I worked at a food pantry and a thrift store and a place that provided services for the homeless. I didn't realize in that moment that I was, you know, what was being instilled in me was empathy for other people whose experiences are different than your own, but you can still, you know, appreciate their differences and understand that they deserve, you know, care and kindness. I think looking back, I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't realize the puzzle pieces were coming together when they were, but they were. Long answer.
Thank you for sharing that.
I was just going to say, I'm very envious that your school actually has a model that means you put this ideal of service to others and service to community really probably in a lot of your school experiences. So I see that in Emily's work, because, you know, as you told me, the first thing you told me is to watch, go and learn a little bit more about the work you did, and I did, which is really great. You can really see someone's passion and interest through the work that they do. For me, I grew up in a slightly different system. My approach to service really at first was because I was an assistant professor, and pretty much with any higher education universities, service is something that you sort of have to do, is part of your requirement. So I learned, and that's one. Oh, can you guys not hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Seems
I
like
can.
Emily. So I was going to say that my advice that I want to offer you all is I mean, it's probably cliche, but really make sure that you find something that matches your personal interest, your personal skill set, and something that you can see yourself in a long run. For me, I feel, doing something that makes you feel content and happy, then it doesn't feel like doing service work per se. It's just something that nourishes you. For me, it's been tied always to my community, which is the ethnic, language, and cultural community that I live in St. Louis. But it pushes me to reach out to other things and learn and grow. But it always goes back to that original idea of how this is, very well aligned to my skill set, but also to my actual, personal value. So.
Miss Garrity, you are an Ursuline alum, so you know that Serbian is a big part of who we are. And you talked a lot about your high school experience, but I just want to know, do you think that Serbian has directly impacted the work that you're doing and the difference you're making on your community?
I would say, it's a hard question to answer. The question that I'm saying here on the presentation, did my Ursuline experience impact my career and the choices of stories I choose to pitch? I think definitely. I think most of my stories are about women. And so I think, that going to Ursuline and really feeling empowered as a woman, I think that definitely has, impacted the stories I tell. And certainly, I think, we heard a lot of stories about women who had, faced hardship and, reacted with, love and joy and care for others. And so certainly I think I have an attachment to those stories for that reason. And in terms of like impact on the community, I mean, I think you can only hope to have a positive impact on the community. Sometimes when I think about media, I think like, I really love, giving people a microphone. So you hope that people listen and that it does impact the community. I hope that it is, spreading empathy and, love for others and your neighbors. Of course, that's, what I hope and change that needs to happen. I would say yes as well. It has impacted me, my Ursuline experience, as well as, a million other experiences.
Right. Yeah, that's really wonderful. And it definitely has impacted our community, which I think is wonderful too. So, yeah.
Thanks.
And during these COVID-19 epidemics, we are facing many challenges such as social panic and restriction freedom. And do you have any advice for our students during this special time?
Do you want to go first, Ben? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, I enjoy. So sure, I would say I think I actually think that the younger generation. I say that because I not only do I work with my college students, but I also work with St. Louis-based high school Asian American high school advocacy group, and I work with them on a regular basis, about 12 of them, and so I'll give you an example. One of the things they were doing was a census outreach. They were doing a project, and they were going to actually have a lot of events set up at grocery stores and community centers and Buddhist temples and Hindu temples and right. So it was going to be about get the word out so that we have more Asian Americans take the census so that we could be better represented. But then, of course, as soon as COVID-19 hit and social restriction, like we said, restriction of freedom started to happen, they had to really quickly switch to a completely online mode. And at the same time, I was needing to do the same thing for my own teaching. And I was kind of observing how they were reacting to it. And I realized I was learning so much from them. So I think that I actually think that in that particular regard, figuring out how to do daily activities and functions, organizational functions, that actually comes as a natural, instinct for our younger generation. So my advice is actually say, this is something that's kind of in your pate. You should be, you should be continuing to inspire other people. I know some local high school students who are doing food drive online. They're organizing, fundraising online. So I would say treat this as a challenge to be more involved. Definitely don't step back. I think if whatever you were able to accomplish before, you should be able to accomplish just as much, if not more. So I don't know if that's a good answer.
I like that. I would say that my advice, which is something that I think everybody should do, especially in regards to the misinformation online, is when you hear something, sort of stop and think. What I sort of say to myself in my head is like, what's going on here? Like, if you see something that looks like it might be misinformation online, like, really kind of like do some digging, to find out, is that true? Or even things like maybe you see a post from someone whose political views are different than your own. And I think I see a lot of stuff on Facebook really from, both sides of the political spectrum that don't include, like, this is a very concrete suggestion, don't include any sources. I saw something the other day that was like, a meme that said like, pro-Trump reporter asks offensive question to, Governor Cuomo. And I listened to it and I sort of thought, that's interesting that, it seemed to me as a reporter, like a totally valid question. So to sort of, I think, assume that questioning what somebody is saying is inherently political on one side or the other is not necessarily right. And, especially for video clips where they're putting, I do it myself as a journalist, you're putting the most sort of tantalizing line first. You really should be, reading the whole article and not just the headline, and be questioning, like, what that source, what's the source for that. So I think in terms of the misinformation thing, I think if you see something that seems, sort of dramatic, or, whether it's what you agree with or not, I think that you should, be questioning where the information is coming from. And then I think that's sort of like my first advice would be to always like remain curious and sort of ask like, what's happening here? And my second piece of advice would be sort of kind of along the lines of what I'm saying, is just like to remember to have empathy for others, and that this is an unprecedented time and not everybody really knows how to handle it. Everybody's handling it differently. And so I think it is very, and I'm not perfect at it, but I think just, you know, having empathy for people in your actions. And I think it only helps, especially with like mental health really on people's minds. I think that it helps with your own mental health just to not be angry at people. I think that being empathetic to others and understanding that we're all sort of trying to figure it out is also very important, even if, you know, we don't necessarily agree with people's actions or feelings. That's what I got.
Thank you. I totally agree with that.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you. I feel like it was a little rambly, but
So this is a statement or advice to the Ursuline community and my fellow sisters. As an Ursuline community, there are just so many things we can do to better our society. And after listening to this wonderful service that these two women have done together and separately, we have to find our call to action as sisters. So find what inspires you. Find something about another culture that you're inspired by or curious about. And you have to find out how you're living the motto of Servium in your daily life, even at home now.
And I want to thank Ms. Garrity and Dr. Liu for sharing your ideas and advice. And your work is a great model for us. And we know the epidemics may cause many complaints and difficulties. However, under the gospel call of Serbian, we can always gather our strength together and overcome them. There's always something that we can do to serve each other, local communities, our country, and the global society. And make those ideas into actions, and we will see a better world.
So
thank you so much for having me.
So as we wrap up, I want to add my thanks to all of you, everyone who's participated and made this conversation happen. We appreciate it. And I speak on behalf of the whole Ursuline community. And just want to point out one thing, and that is referring back to Min's comment that many immigrants feel like they kind of walk a line between two different worlds. The point of our global education program is that we step out of our world and that we become more conscious that there is a bigger world beyond St. Louis and beyond the United States, and that we take responsibility for stepping into those other worlds and doing our part. So thank you for giving us that to think about, and we appreciate your time and your thoughtfulness today.
Thank you for including me.